Welcome to the Bob Priest Show of Life podcast. I'm your host, Bob Priest. Thanks for tuning in today's show. This podcast is dedicated to individuals and professionals who desire to learn more about the subject of health and wellness, as well as alternative technologies to better health and vitality. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Bob Priest Show of Life podcast. I'm your host, Bob Priest. Thanks for tuning in to today's show. My guest is Janelle Anderson, certified professional coach, author, and renowned speaker. Hi, Janelle. How are you today?
Hey, Bob. I'm fine. I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing great. So what's the weather like there in Virginia?
Well, it's been cold today. Spring comes and then it goes, just like
I
that.
know it was like 70 degrees the other day, and now it's like 40 or barely 50 out today. So,
Yeah, really cool.
yeah,
Our heat back on, and I wore my coat to take the dogs around the block.
I know it. It's a fast jaunt when we go outside. Today, folks, Janelle is a long-term time friend of mine, and she is really she's done great at everything she's done. But I'm just so impressed with the direction that Janelle has gone, and she's a creator of her own signature online course, Magnetic Message Mastery. She has a 12-month mastermind program, Monetize Your Message Mastermind. She's utilized as an expert and a speaker and a storyteller to help women entrepreneurs, coaches, and experts develop a powerful voice and presence. So, man, you have done a lot of things in the length of time you and I have known each other.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you some questions today and just kind of let our audience learn about you, Janelle Anderson,
Okay.
and the coach. And in my experience with you, a lot of our involvement has been in church activities, and we taught together back in the day. And you were one of my fabulous teachers when I was an administrator. And so I was so impressed with you as an educator. And obviously, you're taking that expertise into the dimension that you're into now. But what brought you to do what you're doing today?
Well, yeah, it's kind of been a long, windy road, right? I started off as a teacher, as you know, and I always loved teaching from the time I was a little girl. I used to invite the neighborhood kids over to teach them, and it wasn't playtime for me. I wanted to teach them something. So I always loved teaching and pouring into people. I've always felt like I could see potential in people. And there was always this drive in me to pull it out and let them see it and really encourage them to develop that potential to their very best. So as a teacher, that was always my driving motivation to do everything that a teacher does. And then it's always been there. So after I left teaching, my husband and I, as you know, we ran a couple of businesses, and then for various reasons, they didn't last that long. So then we both went back to work, and I was working in a school system as the administrative assistant in an elementary school. And I loved my job. I loved my boss. But by this time I was mid 50s, and I was starting to, well, maybe even later, 57, I think. And I started really feeling restless and bored. I mean, I had the job down pat. It didn't take me long to learn it. And my boss would always say to me, well, you are too big for this job. You have a lot more in you than this. And so I started to just search for, well, what is next for me? And what do I want to do? Because I always knew that I wouldn't be the type to just retire at 65 and not have something, you know? So I decided I wanted to figure out what I could do that would create an income for me through as long as I want to do it. And it needed to be something I was passionate about, that I wouldn't get bored doing, and that I could pour into people and help them become all that they can be, which has always been like the driving force of my life. So I didn't know about coaching at the time. And so I was doing a lot of research of like businesses you could do from home. And I researched a few things. I started going to different directions. And then I ended up getting a job at Virginia Tech in the women's center there. And while I was there, they used the Strengths Finder assessment all throughout the university. And so being one of the employees, I could take it. And then I got coached by one of our staff members around my strengths. And I loved that so much. I've always loved assessments anyway. I love to see what makes people tick. And so then I got some training at Tech with that tool, and I started using it with everybody I knew. And I would like go to my family members and friends and say, go take the strengths finder and then sit down with me and we'll have a chat about your strengths. And it just fired me up like nothing else did. And so I started thinking, well, maybe I should be a strengths coach. And so I looked into that, and then I looked further into just coaching in general and started seeing, like, at first I thought, is this something you actually make money doing, or is it just fun? And the more I researched the industry, the more I learned that it was a growing, burgeoning industry, and that definitely you could make a living doing it. So then I looked at all the training schools out there, and there are a ton of them. And I talked to some coaches and just found a school that I kept being drawn to, back to, and finally decided to take the leap. And by that time, I was 61 and decided, well, I struggled a little bit with, am I too old to do this and put all this money into this training? And what if I don't make it? And what if I'm not a success? And blah, blah, blah. Finally, one day I was just like, enough. There are plenty of people my age and older who have started things. And I saw all these stories online, even like Grandma Moses. She started like really late and they were successful. So why can't I do it? And so that's when I really felt called to it. It was like this passion, and it was like nothing else I'd experienced ever. And so I went for it and got through the training, got certified, and have just been going ever since and just love it. It's been the greatest decision ever and the greatest part of my life, I think. So
That's so awesome. So, no secret recipes. You couldn't be another Colonel Sanders, but
no.
yeah, he was later in life when he started
Yeah,
the chicken
he
business.
was.
But that is so cool. That is really cool. So what are some of the top challenges women face when it comes to confidence and speaking up?
Yeah. So, and I work with women mostly. I have coached men before, but women is usually who I work with. And confidence is one of those things for women that's, and I know men struggle with it sometimes too, but there's been so much research about confidence in women versus men. And they found that, even women that are successful, that have high levels of um, leadership positions in companies, maybe they're CEOs or presidents of companies, or they've been super successful. Even women that have their own business that are super successful, they still struggle with this lack of confidence and this imposter syndrome. Even Maya Angelou, who was super successful, we all know she was successful, and she was quoted as saying that after her 11th book, I think it was, she said, every time I finish a book, I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out now that I'm really not all that great. And so I think that the top challenges really have to do with, first of all, women don't, and I think a lot of this is just all through the years and centuries of society's messages to women that we should diminish ourselves and be small and be in the quiet, stay in the quiet background. And so when we accomplish something, we don't necessarily even look at it or think about it or see it as an accomplishment. We just sort of breeze by it and go on to the next thing. And most women are kind of living in this fear, like, well, I accomplished that, but I think that's it. I don't think I can accomplish anything more. And just not able to really own that accomplishment and feel proud of ourselves and say, hey, I did that. And it took a lot of work and it was challenging, but I did it, and own it and speak about it. And so that's one thing I do try to help women to do, is to let's stop and make a big deal over this accomplishment, because this was big, even if it was something small, it was big for you.
Exactly.
And own it and feel proud of yourself. And women struggle with that. They think they're going to be bragging or boasting and putting themselves out there too much. And I just say, no, you're not. You're just saying what's true. This is something you did, and you can own it and not be boastful. And so that's one of the biggest ones. And another big one is women just don't really see the value of who they are. They're always putting everybody else first, and we have that nurturing part of us, and we just are always taking care of everyone else, and we put ourselves on the back burner. We feel guilty if we do something for ourselves, or we pursue our own passions, or spend time on our own thing, or money in investing in ourselves because of that.
Yeah,
So, you know,
you and I grew up in the Christian faith,
mhm.
and I was having a conversation the other day with some people at church, and we have some really strong ladies in our church that stand in the pulpit and preach. I
Yes.
love that, and but I've run across so many other people, men and women alike, that
Mhm.
just don't see that value of the ladies that are standing up there, and the things that we can garner from them that come from the scripture. And then we don't stop and think there was a lot of strong women in the Bible.
Yes, there were.
And we need to stop and realize that if we hadn't had those women back then, thousands of years ago, where would we be today?
Yeah.
And you can break that down into small bites. And there's our grandmothers and our mothers, our sisters, our sister-in-laws, whatever, that brings so much to the family unit.
Yeah.
And I applaud women. I really see them and value what they bring to the table. I hope you saw that when I was an administrator back in the day.
Yeah,
But we had
definitely.
so many strong ladies that taught at our school
Hmm.
that I went to them frequently, you and being one of them, and would
Hmm.
ask you questions because I can only know so much. And
Right.
so you need to have people right there that are helping you through that.
Yeah.
So I really love that, and I champion what you're doing, and I agree that we need to allow people to feel empowered and get over this imposter syndrome that a lot of people feel. I mean, I deal with that myself sometimes,
Sure.
so I totally understand it. So, what are some things that differentiate you from other coaches doing similar work?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Coaches sometimes, especially new coaches, worry about competition and other coaches focusing on the same niche. And I always say it doesn't matter because it's not just what you focus on or what area you coach around. It's you as the person and what you bring to the table, being uniquely yourself, your personality, your viewpoints, your experiences that you've had, and just how you see things, how you approach things is different and unique. And so for me, I think one of the things that, even though, lots of people focus on confidence, and I focus a lot on helping other coaches and entrepreneurs to speak with confidence, to put together their talks and their excuse me, their stories, and learn how to speak. And there's a lot of people that do speaking coaching, or speaker coaches, I guess you could say. But I think what differentiates me is, number one, is my teaching background. So, I am a natural educator, and so I bring a lot of knowledge and just kind of innate strengths around how to create a learning path for people. Because, in all those years, we had curriculums we had to follow, and we had lesson plans and objectives, and you always wanted your kids to interact and do something to follow up. So I understand how people learn. And so I always interject into everything I do. I don't just give information. I involve my audience. I involve my clients. I involve my students in my, or, clients in my group. I guess you could say they're not really students, but I involve them if I'm teaching at an event, and I do a lot of that, workshops and things like that. I always have them doing something with me. And a lot of people don't. They just kind of teach their material and they give their content out. And so I'm always looking for how I can help my clients learn. I'm always seeing potential in them, and I'm able to pull it out of them and show them what they don't see for themselves. I think that's another thing that makes me unique. And I think also, a lot of times what makes you unique is your background, the things that you've walked through,
Mhm.
and so I've walked through a lot of trauma from my early 20s that I didn't deal with for many years, and then went through a really deep healing uh, journey in my church. And just the change was amazing, the transformation in my life. And so I bring a lot of that understanding of what trauma can do to you and the effect that it can have. And I also understand how to come out of that and be transformed, and how to change the way that you view your past, how you change your thinking and beliefs. And that is something I really bring to the table. And no matter what I'm doing, I can do that inner work. If we're working on an outer goal, I can still dive into what's really getting in the way, and what are those stories you're telling yourself, and help people to really vocalize that and bring it out into the open so they can be free of it. And then, as a Christian, I feel like I bring a lot of spiritual uh, depth of understanding of the soul and the heart of a person, and our purpose in this life, and how God has uniquely designed us and created us and has a purpose for each one of us. A lot of times I don't have Christians in my programs, or my not all my clients are, but I still can sense a lot of things. I feel like the Holy Spirit whispers to me like things about this person, that, what's really going on in their life, and
Right.
can help them see that too.
You know, it's interesting hearing you tell me this, and then thinking while you're telling me about my experiences watching you in a classroom or seeing from afar across a room how you interacted with young people. And if I remember correctly, you were mainly dealt with seventh graders, wasn't it?
I
When
had fifth, sixth graders, and then seventh grade science. So
Okay.
right in that middle
I knew you
school.
had all that middle school area, but
Yeah. Mhm.
so and they're all different. Each
Yeah.
one of those grade levels is different and they react different. But I remember many stories of how Miss Anderson um, listened to me, and how
Mhm.
Miss Anderson applied something that you were just sharing just now, and but it affected that young lady or that young man, that made them a better person or allowed them to become a better person. And so you were doing everything that you now are doing for adults back when you worked with young people. And that's really encouraging that you're
Yeah.
still taking the skills that you had back then and you're applying them to just a different level person.
Yeah.
Um,
I
I
really believe.
really was caught up in your titles of your books,
Hmm.
and I read some things online about them and all that. But um, Come Into My Garden. What prompted that title and that book?
Yeah. So it is a collection of journal entries. In fact, it's behind me on the shelf there. Come Into My Garden. Uh, it was originally, I put it together originally to be a gift for my mom years ago. And I had been journaling. I took a course many, many years ago, over 20 years ago now, with Christian Leadership University, where I eventually actually got my master's degree. And the course was How to Hear God's Voice. And it actually totally revolutionized. It was right around the time I started coming to the church you and I went to together. And I started journaling, like hearing two-way journaling, he calls it. So I'm not just writing out my thoughts, but I learned to listen deeply to God speaking to me in my spirit, and hear his voice and distinguish that from all the other voices. And I made it a practice to really listen, and pictures would come into my mind, and I would ask God, what are you showing me? Because, I'd get myself quiet, get in his presence, and just ask him to speak to me. And sometimes a picture would come, and he would then explain to me what he was showing me. And so I wrote it all down. I have tons and tons of journals, 30 years worth. And so I picked out some of the most powerful ones, put them together in a book to give my mom. And I self-published it, I think using Blurb at the time. And my friend, I gave her a copy, and she started quoting me on Facebook. And she said she was using it as a devotional book. And I thought, oh, maybe I should make it that. And so then I worked on it. I reformatted it so that it could be a devotional. So each chapter starts with one of my journals, and then I explain what God spoke to me in that. And then I draw out of their scriptures that, relate to what he was speaking to me. And then I give them a journal prompt. Now you go listen to God's voice and what's he saying to you about this? And so that's what that is. And Come Into My Garden is one of the first journal entries in that book. It was one of those pivotal, like I'm sure you've had many of these times with God, and God shows you something and you're like, oh, wow, like it changes everything. And this was a picture I saw of a garden, and it had a wall around it. And Jesus was like walking around peeking over the wall, and then he found the door and he went in, and the garden was gorgeous and lush, had fruit and green and flowers, and it was just beautiful. And he took a piece of fruit off the tree and ate it and threw his head back and laughed like he was just enjoying this garden. It was so wonderful. And then he stopped and he goes over to the edge of the garden. And that's when I noticed that beyond the beautiful part of the garden, it's all overgrown with thorns and it's dark and shrouded with something. And he goes and he picks up some gardening tools, and he looks at me with this look in his on his face like, can I go there? Can I go deeper in the garden and start pruning that too? And after I saw that, I just was like, I know what that means. It means it was like a part of my heart. It just represented my heart, my soul, my heart, my soul, like the inner part of me. And after becoming a Christian, coming out of all that trauma, because I had been sex trafficked for 3 years in my 20s. And at the end of that is when I got saved. And coming out of that, there was a lot of work that God did in my heart, but it stopped. Like I didn't let him go any further. And so all these years I had lived sort of in this outer garden as a Christian, but I would never let people get too close. And I didn't ever tell anybody my secret, right? Because I was so ashamed of it. And there were some other things that had happened. But in this vision, he was asking permission to go deeper so that he could really heal my heart and set me free. And many times he would speak to me during these times of just journaling, like, there's more for you. I have so much more for you to do. And finally, it got to this place where I had to say yes, because he wasn't going to force anything. And I knew that he was asking permission. And finally I said, okay, I knew what that meant. It meant that I needed to talk about the past with somebody and get some help. And I had never had done that my whole time, from the time I was 26 till I'm in my 50s now. So I finally did. I got some help in my church. There's a ministry called Freedom Teams Ministry where they sit down with you and they help you. You just can talk out all this stuff and you get forgiveness, you give forgiveness, you start realizing what things you've believed that weren't true about you. And I remember going to one of my first sessions during this time, and I knew that I was supposed to talk about this other night that had happened before the trafficking when I was a sophomore in college. And I had actually been drugged and raped. But in my mind, it was my fault. It was always my fault. Somehow that night I did something that put myself in that position, and I lost my virginity that night. So the shame was so heavy, and I'd always carried it. I never had talked about it. So I'm on my way to this session, and it kept coming to me, talk about that night that you lost your virginity, which is how I always thought of that night. Mm-hmm. I never thought of it as being raped. I always thought the night I lost my virginity in a one night stand, And I kept thinking, why should I talk about that? That's been ages and ages ago. It's not relevant to anything. It's gone. It's in the past. Like I just didn't understand how it would be important to talk about. But I did, in obedience, I did. And I brought it up. I said, this is what I feel like I need to talk about. And as I'm describing the evening to my counselor, she goes, it sounds like to me you were drugged and raped. And it was a shock. I was like, what?
I bet. What? I bet.
Yeah. So all those years, it never once occurred to me. And so through that process, I was able to actually see the truth of what had actually happened, and that I was not a worthless woman who let somebody do that to me. I was actually taken advantage of. I was actually traumatized. I was actually a victim. Right. That truth came out, and I was able to release a lot of emotions that had never come out before and let it go, and forgive myself. And the same thing happened with all the trafficking. So that Come Into My Garden that vision, I named the book that because it was the beginning of my healing. And that vision that he gave me, that picture that, sometimes he'll speak to us through pictures that words don't quite, get it. He just can communicate to us right to the heart. And because I said yes, that, he was able to go deeper into the garden and clean it up.
Wow, Janelle, that is a tremendous story, and to find yourself in that book, in the journal, and
Mhm.
as you're saying, the visual aids that came about,
Yeah.
that's so powerful. And I'm sure this book is touching other women that have gone through similar scenarios out there. That is
Yeah.
so tremendous.
Thank you.
And then I love this, and this is one that I caught my attention just a few months ago, was take center stage
Yeah.
and be the star of your own story. And
Yeah.
I saw a posting, I think it was on Facebook. I guess it was when you were first displaying the book and everything, and it caught my attention. And here's the thing that really caught me: you were radiant in that post. You were absolutely stunning.
Mm.
And I was hoping I'd run into you one day to tell you that
Oh,
you
wow.
just were sparkling. And I was
Thank
like,
you.
I know this lady. She's a star. I know her.
That's
I was so
awesome.
proud of you when I saw that. And so tell us a little bit about
You.
that one.
Yeah, that's sort of continuation, I guess you could say, from Coming to My Garden is more like geared towards being a journal and a devotional. But Take Center Stage, the Lord told me that I needed to actually tell my story in writing, because by this point I was saying it out loud. I was talking about it, but I had never written about it. And it was at a time where I was coming to on the other side of all of that inner, healing work and getting all this stuff out. And I remember sitting here thinking, and I had started to write some ideas down for the book. And I was sitting here thinking, I feel like I'm taking center stage of my own life for the first time ever as me. Like I'm coming
So
out
cool.
from behind the curtain, and I'm coming out in this. I'm like, it was this connection to myself. I had been disconnected from my true self all those years. There was a disconnect. And sort of I was, holding that past and stuffing it away inside the house and not letting people in. And now I was bringing it all out, and I was coming together, and I was seeing who I truly am, and I had gotten to the place where I felt comfortable in my own skin. I loved who I was able to walk out there on stage as me. I didn't have to pretend. I love who I am. Like I was feeling this confidence, and I thought I need to write this so other women can feel it too. And so that book, I also looked through all my journals, and I saw the path that he had taken me on over all these years, through things he had spoken to me and shown me in the journaling, but things people had spoken over me as well. And I kind of lined it out, and I thought, this is like a process I went through. And STAR is the acronym for the process he took me through. And so the book lines that all out, but it also tells my story in pretty good detail of the trauma, and a bunch of other stories, and how God through the years has led me step by step by step to this place of feeling like whole again and confident in who I am, and able to step out there without fear and speak up when I was always afraid to speak up before, and kind of put myself out there. And I have a workbook that goes with it that takes people through that process as well, and I have a course that goes with it and some audio that goes with it. And I just love to use it as a tool to bring that same freedom. A lot of what's in there was the same things that our church does in our ministry, the Freedom Team's ministry, of how to pray through and how to forgive. And there's the whole story actually of the church you and I went to, because I was really hurt through something that happened there. And that's when I went to this church, and that's when I really learned the power of forgiveness in a
Mhm.
big way. So I talk about that, and redemption, and even the people that had hurt me, we have talked since then, and everything's fine, and just that whole uh, concept of being able to, um, I mean, God showed me so many things about me in that it was amazing. And so I think that's a book about coming of age for me, but for anybody else that reads it, they can I didn't want it to be just my story. I wanted it to be a book of self-transformation as well. So I really made sure I focused on here's my story, but here's how you can also find your own freedom and discover the greatness that's in all of us, you know?
That
So,
is a tremendous. The first book I thought was wonderful, but then to hear how you wrote this one and why you wrote it, and the whole thought process of taking center stage of your life. So share a story of a client that maybe you've helped through that process, and what that looked like. Just, you don't have to be a long story, but just share one with us.
oh, okay, sure. So many. One that's, recently is I won't share her name just for confidentiality, but she's worked with me for probably 2 or 3 years. She started coming to my speaker sisterhood club that I used to run, and I now have a different club. It's a speaking club, but she came because she wanted to build confidence in her ability at work to speak up at meetings, and she felt a lot like I did, like nobody wants to hear anything I have to say. She grew up on a farm with all brothers, and they, you know, have I had 4 brothers too, and, they can really joke around a lot and, um, especially, being the only girl. So I think a lot of times around her brothers, she felt like she didn't have a voice, and because 'cause they'd make fun of her and stuff. And, she wanted to move her career ahead, but she was afraid to speak up. So she was in a manager role, but she wasn't really showing her leadership abilities. And nobody even knew what she was thinking because she was so afraid to speak up. So we started there, and she started getting more and more confidence. She In that club, you make a speech and you practice speaking it, and then you get feedback on your speaking. So it's very, very focused on speaking skills and the words you're saying and how you're saying them. But it was also the curriculum we used was also very self reflective. So it was really not just speeches about things out here, it was coming from your heart. And so she began to open up more. And then she eventually joined my mastermind. So there was a lot more of developing of leadership skills and setting goals, like where do I want to go with this, and who do I want to be, and what do I really want. And then she ended up being a one-on-one client. So for the last year, at least, we've been really focused on confidence in who she is. And when things would come up at work where she'd start to, you know, take on too much guilt and stuff over things that had happened that really she shouldn't have been taken on guilt for, or feeling like they're not going to see me as a leader if I make a mistake, and really afraid to make mistakes. And yet, I could see all this leadership that was in her that was phenomenal. So, we did a lot of like assessments of her strengths and her personality so she could really come to this full understanding of who she is. We dealt with a lot of the stuff from the past, those stories again, that you have embedded in your heart that you think are true and they're not at all. And then we started being really focused on leadership skills, how to lead her team, how to communicate with her team, and how to empower them. And then just a couple of months ago, she was promoted to director. So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
It's awesome.
So her
But
success was my success.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
so it's a process for sure.
Yeah. It's definitely a process.
So do you have another book in the background that's you're working on? Is there something that's got a title already, or
Well, I'm not working on one. But the wheels are turning. One thing I would love to do is a book of stories of the women that I'm working with directly, like my clients, women that are going through my mastermind and telling their stories. And I also have a podcast that's filled with a lot of stories, and I'm going to probably relaunch it again soon with a new format where it will be just story driven. So I am thinking that would make a really cool book. Each chapter would be a different story of a different woman and what she's gone through and what she's done to pursue her dreams, and how she's overcome, her, excuse me, her own obstacles through our work together. I've thought about like fearless women, or, my company is emerging life coaching, and my podcast is Women Emerging Fearlessly. So something around that line. That's what I've been playing around with.
Well, I sure encourage you to do that because I'm a reader. I've always been a reader, and I listen to a lot of podcasts now too. And I always get something. There's always a snippet or a little one liner, two liners that hit me hard, and then I go chew on it for a while, and it helps me to reflect even in my own life, maybe where some shortcomings are. So I definitely encourage you to do that. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I
Um,
love stories. I love to hear people's stories.
I
I
do
think
too. I really do, and I'm enjoying hearing your story because it's been several years since we've been able to sit down and really, chat a lot about our past several years and what we've been doing. And like I said, I'm really proud of you.
thank you.
What would you like your listeners to take away from this episode today?
I think probably overall is to know that you have a choice in your life to either, um, you can either step out and be who you are, or you can allow life to step on you and keep you a victim. You can step out there and be a victor, take life by the reins and, take the steering wheel and be who you were meant to be, or you can just stay back in the shadows. And I did that for most of my life and not knowing that I had a choice, but you have a choice. Nobody else can do this for you, right? There's a chapter in my book called Reclaim Your Heart. And that was the chapter talking about really seeing all the lies that it's like a garden analogy again, but it was a dream I had actually of an estate, and it was in disrepair, and I had come home from a concert and didn't realize this was my property. But for some reason in the dream, I was like, oh, this is my property. The windows were boarded up. It was falling apart. And I go out on the back and there's all this land and there's people living. I called them squatters. They had dug deep holes in the ground and had built fires. They'd obviously been there a really long time. And in the dream, I get out a megaphone and start commanding them to leave. And they're like, no, we live here. Nobody owns this property. We've been here for a long time. We don't have to go. And I'm like, no, this is my property. You have to go. And there was this battle that ensued. And finally, they were all gone. And I stood on the porch, and all the people that were with me were clapping and applauding me. And I had this overwhelming sense of such acceptance. And it was like I had come home to myself and I had taken back my heart. I had taken back my property, really. So, everybody has that choice to either let those squatters stay there in the land, and we all have them, all these thoughts and ideas and beliefs that have been there from childhood, usually, and we believe that they're true, but nobody can clear out that and reclaim your heart except for you. And so I just encourage people to really take the time to do that kind of work, because until you do, you can't really live up to your fullest potential. And we have such unlimited potential. And
Yeah.
most of us are only living up to a very small percentage of it.
I was
So,
reading not long ago, I can't remember the exact amount percentage, but it was really small of how much we use our brain
yeah,
compared to
it's like,
what its capacity really would
yeah,
allow. But
yeah.
so, Janelle, I'm just so encouraged by this podcast today and to see the success you've had, but also the trials and struggles that you went through to get to this point. And now the fact that you've been able to reach many, many other people, mostly women, but that was where your calling was maybe.
Mhm.
But who knows? I may be one of your clients.
Yeah, you never know.
I am now because I've started this with you. But
Yeah.
so lastly, what would be the best way for people to reach out to you if they would like to discuss one of your programs or how to get your books or what your website is and so on? Could you just tell our listeners the best way to do that? And then we'll end this up today and say goodbye to everyone.
Sure. Yeah. So the best way is probably just email me, Janelle at emerginglifecoaching.com. And that's my website also, emerginglifecoaching.com. On my website, there is a contact form. You could fill that out as well. But I'd love to hear from people, and we can get on a phone call and chat if it's something you want to explore. If maybe you think that I can help you with something, I'm happy to get on a phone or a Zoom call and just chat about it.
And you're on Facebook and LinkedIn, correct?
I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, but mostly I spend most of my time on Facebook. I have a group there for women emerging fearlessly also. And then for people that really want to become confident with speaking, I have a group for that as well. Speak confidently to sell. But if you just find me on Facebook, and then I am on LinkedIn, I'm getting more and more involved in LinkedIn, and also Alignable. I don't know if you've ever heard of Alignable, but
Oh, that's a new one for me.
yeah, it's a small business um, site, and it's kind of like LinkedIn in a way. But there's a lot of people on there. It's growing. So
Well, that's cool.
yeah.
Well, Janelle, I would like to thank you again for being willing to spend a few minutes with us and let my listeners get to know who you are, and hopefully they will find this beneficial and will reach out to you for maybe some concerns or issues that they're dealing with in their life. So thank you, folks, for tuning in today to the Bob Priest Show of Life podcast with my guest, Janelle Anderson. And we look forward to seeing you on our next podcast. Have a great day. Bye.